Welcome back to Root Source. This is Bob Odell, and we're with Dr. Brad Young, the translator of the Newer Testament, an English translation which affirms the New Testament's authentic Hebrew heritage, or as you like to say, hear it as they heard it, right?
That's right.
Okay. So we talked about the basic ideas of the translation and a little bit of your early life. How did you get to Israel, and when did you get to Israel?
Well, Bob, I was very fortunate because my grandfather, who was a pharmacist, he was a Baptist deacon, and in some ways he was thought to be a little radical in the church, to be honest. But he had traveled to Israel in 1936 and 1956. He actually traveled from Cairo to Damascus on the trains, and he had a rabbi that was his traveling companion. They became fast friends. And he would tell me all these stories. And in 1972, he paid my way to go to Israel.
1972.
At that time,
Wow.
I was involved in a coffee house ministry that I'd started in our little community in Oklahoma. And we had 3 churches that were involved in their youth groups. But when I went to Israel, it seemed like this is where I would really understand the Bible and begin to see Jesus as a Jewish individual, a Jewish leader, a Jewish teacher, and here he's interacting with his own people. And I think most people that read the New Testament, they see Jesus as the Christian kind of having a fight with these Jews. And so instead of seeing this family discussion, we don't see that right interaction. It's very interesting, famous biblical scholar in Israel, Micha Gutman. I remember one time he was talking, he said, what's the essence of Jewish faith? It's the machloket. That is a sharp debate. You're learning by interacting with one another. And that's what we see in the New Testament. It's so much of a Jewish expression of faith. You discover the truth through discussion and interaction. And of course, Jesus is proclaiming the kingdom. And we see these beautiful stories of a miracle where there's a teaching involved. And so we have to see that context in Israel. So, when I went to Israel, I had to study in Hebrew at the Hebrew University. I remember with the class's wonderful scholar who had such an impact on me, David Foose.
The David Foose.
The David Foose.
He's impacted so many people, has touched so many lives.
I was so fortunate to be able to write my doctoral dissertation under his direction, also with Shmuel Safrai, and then I worked as his research assistant for 8 years away. I edited one of his books, but we became very close.
Obviously, he's a professor at Hebrew University, but what is he known for? What was
he became very famous for the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he edited a critical edition of Yosipon. This was a text that dealt with the history of the Second Temple period, written, not Josephus, but written much later. But he received the Israel Prize for that very, very great honor. Wow. And he published on the New Testament. He really became a leading scholar in New Testament studies and the Dead Sea Scrolls, a linguist. He had a classical background. He began with classical Greek. Okay. He was born in Czechoslovakia.
And he's passed away now.
He's passed away
since
now.
2015, I believe, right?
Right.
Okay.
But he has such a contribution.
And he had such a relationship with his students, too. And that's when I said the David Foose. I'm actually thinking about how his, the professor-to-student relationship was very special. Many people claim him as a special, their most favorite professor or whatever. So what was it like interacting with him? I think I interrupted you when you were about to talk about that.
Well, I think that really helped me see the importance of this translation. I'll say, a translation is such a big project. It wasn't something I thought I should do or I necessarily wanted to do, but I did see the need. But, he would read the Greek text. You'd think in modern Israel, students would come in with a modern translation of the New Testament in Hebrew and you discuss it. No. Foose, you had this little finger, he's reading the Greek text we're talking about. We had to translate from Greek into Hebrew, so we were using modern Hebrew. But you think, well, how was that in Mishnaic Hebrew? How was that in biblical Hebrew? What did that mean in the Talmud? What would that mean in the Midrash? What would that mean in the Dead Sea Scrolls? What is the original Jewish context? And I begin to see just in these classes. We also read the Apostolic Fathers in Greek and studied them in Hebrew with David Foose. And we read, other books. Much of the focus, I was working on the parables of Jesus. I've written a couple of books on the parables of Jesus, but David Foose really helped me in seeing the parables and the connection to rabbinic parables from maybe a little later period, some at the same time. But that really taught me how to translate to understand the culture, the context, going from Greek. Look at the context, then try to understand it in English, then try to put it in a functional equivalency. It needs to be a literal translation. You don't make up the translation. It has to be based on that Greek text, but it needs to communicate what it did in the first century. So sometimes we're so focused on getting a modern English translation that we forget what was the context. What were, the books of the New Testament were written by Jewish people for Jewish people, or Luke, who may not have been Jewish, was using Jewish sources. They were written sources and eyewitnesses that were Jewish that he was communicating.
So it's not like David Flusser was a Messianic Jew or anything, but he was interested in early writings that might give insight into the Jewishness of the period, right? The Jewishness of the first century, and what better place to get to go look than the New Testament, right?
Yes, he was Orthodox in his faith. He was devout. I had the privilege of sharing Passovers with him or Shabbats. I used to sometimes give him a ride to the university. I remember one time coming, maybe a little early, but he was wrapped in his talit, his prayer shawl, praying. And we talked a lot about the spiritual issues. And I think that was something that David Foose had. He had kind of an insight into the spirituality of the Jewish people in the first century, and he could see this emerging in the text. So you see a better relationship between Jesus and his contemporaries, and also understand the issues to sharpen them better. Flusser had a great acumen that he could go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, or I remember one time giving him a text from the Middle Ages, and he started translating it into Greek. He said, sometimes if we translate the Dead Sea Scrolls from Hebrew into Greek, then we would understand the connection to the New Testament. This is not a bad idea. So, but he would go, this is what it would be in classical Greek. This is what it is in Koine. This is what it would be in the Church Fathers. But, you had to kind of have that linguistic depth. I would say in America, many times we teach people how to translate using a dictionary, lexicon. And I would say Flusser he would plunge you into the language. You would read these texts till they really become a part of you, and then you have a connection with that text that helps you. Now you have to be objective. You have to do the linguistic, the research. You have to be accurate in grammar. Grammar is very important in your translation work. But there's a level there that you're getting a part of that culture. You join the conversation.
Isn't that interesting? That this approach of plunging yourself into the text, into the culture, and yet that's exactly what you did. You went to Israel and plunged yourself into the culture there, and now you're offering a translation that tries to do this very same thing for the reader. I think this is fascinating. How key was it for you to go and have personal relationship with Orthodox Jews in Israel for this process?
It was foundational. I think living in Israel and religious neighborhood, I lived in a religious neighborhood for time, and of course I'm in Jerusalem, which is a city where you feel the holidays. On Yom Kippur, no traffic moves, and you have this sense of prayer and fasting, or whether it's the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, or whether it's the time of Passover, you're kind of living this with the community, and you're getting some insights. And Orthodox Jewish people are living that faith as Jesus was more Orthodox. I mean, certainly Christianity and Judaism are different today than they were in those days, but it helps you understand that context and live the holidays, live the calendar, know the prayers, many of which were prayed in the temple.
I find it fascinating that your first, and you say there was many people that were close to you that had contributed this project, but the first name you mentioned is the name of an Orthodox Jew professor at Hebrew University. Would you, David Foose, would you claim him as your deepest relationship in the same way that I might claim Gadon, Ariel as my deepest friendship?
Yes,
from Israel?
yes, he would be probably very much my deepest relationship. And I think one aspect of this translation is that I sometimes ask Jewish readers, David Foose or others, even Holocaust survivors, well...
You've asked Holocaust survivors to read this? Wow.
They were friends, and they were concerned about improving understanding between the Jewish and Christian communities. And here's a sacred text. How do you read it? How do you understand it? Maybe there's a way we could translate accurately that would show some sensitivity to some of these issues where, I see Christian anti-Semitism as a Christian problem. That is, it might cause injury or hurt to Jewish people, but it's really our problem, Bob.
Yes.
Because it's in our family, our friends, and reading our sacred text in a way that understands and embraces, as it did in the first century, seeing it as a conversation and the way that they're learning, it makes a big difference instead of this antagonism. I mean, there is Jewish blood on Christian streets because of misreadings of the New Testament and sometimes the spin we see from translation. So anyway, I think that has enriched my understanding of the New Testament. And I think it helps all Christians because they appreciate the faith of Jesus. And that strengthens their faith in Jesus because they can see the way he's living and interacting with others.
Wow. Well, I think it's time to not just talk about the outside of the book, but to open the book. Let's do that in our next segment. So until we come back, for Brad Young, this is Bob Odell from Root Source saying shalom.